The bus pulled around the corner, and the Welcome to Clarksburg sign appeared in the window. I clutched the handle of my tattered suitcase, trying to keep my fingers from shaking nervously. 3 years, 3 whole years since I'd left this little town. It was strange how little it had changed, as if it had been frozen in time while my life had been turned upside down. I pulled a mirror out of my bag. The wrinkles had deepened. The gray hairs had grown back. 67 years old is no joke, especially when you've spent the last 3 years caring for your dying sister in Oak Ridge. Putting the mirror away, I fumbled for my cell phone in my coat pocket. How many times had I dialed my daughter's number to let her know I was back? 10? 15? But I never pressed the call button. Since our last fight, the one before I left, we had hardly spoken to each other. A few short, dry conversations the first year, then complete silence. Alice was always a difficult child, wayward, demanding. Over the years, those qualities only became more acute. And then there was Raymond, her husband, her fifth, I think, a slippery fellow with constant business ideas and no finished projects. The bus stopped at the station. I rose slowly from the seat, wincing at the pain in my back. Arthritis was not sparing. Stepping onto the platform, I squinted for a moment in the bright spring sunshine. April in Clarksburg was always deceptively warm, the sun shining, but the wind chilling to the bone. "Can I help you with your luggage, ma'am?" the young driver asked. "I'll be fine, thank you," I replied, gripping the handle of my suitcase tighter. I had gotten into the habit of relying on myself over the years. It was about a 20-minute walk from the bus station to my house. I'd walked that distance before, but now I decided to take a cab. At least this time I could afford a little luxury. The cab driver, a taciturn middle-aged man, only nodded when I gave him the address. Elm Street, 23, my house. A small but cozy one-story house with a green roof and a white fence. The only thing I had left after my divorce from Herbert 20 years ago. The city flew by outside the window, a new sign in place of the old Thompson's bakery, a renovated church, a fresh playground near the school. Little things, but they were reminders that life here went on without me. Clarksburg had never been a big town about 15,000 people, where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. "Here we are," the driver announced, stopping at an intersection. I paid, leaving a small tip, and got out of the car. And then my heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. My fence, always snow white, was now dark blue. There was an unfamiliar car in the driveway, and the bed of daffodils I planted every spring was gone, giving way to some exotic plants. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the handle of my suitcase so tight my knuckles turned white. Perhaps I had the wrong address. But no, there was the old oak tree I'd saved from being cut down 15 years ago. There was the distinctive curve of the road. Before I could do anything, a patrol car pulled up beside me. A young policeman rolled down his window. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, giving me a hard look. "You look confused." "Yeah, I just got back to town," I mumbled. "And I think there's something wrong with my house." The officer frowned. "This house?" He nodded at number 23. "Are you saying this is your house?" "Yes, of course. I'm Beatrice Winslow. I've lived here for 30 years. The expression on the policeman's face changed. "May I see some identification, ma'am?" I pulled my driver's license out of my bag. It was about to expire, but it was still valid. The officer took it, examined it, and checked something on the radio. Something in his gaze made me tense up. I'd seen many different expressions on people's faces in my life: pity, contempt, indifference. But now the officer's eyes read bewilderment and anxiety. "Ma'am, would you mind taking a seat in the car? We need to clear something up." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What is it, officer?" Please take a seat in the car, he repeated, opening the door. I slowly climbed into the back seat of the patrol car, holding my suitcase between my knees. The officer got behind the wheel and turned to me. Mrs. Winslow, he began cautiously, there's been some kind of mistake. According to our database, Beatrice Winslow passed away 3 years ago. I laughed, nervously, hoarsely. Is this some kind of ridiculous joke? I'm right in front of you. The officer. Now I could make out the name on the badge. Brody shook his head. I'm afraid not. The system clearly states Beatrice Adelaide Winslow, date of birth June 3rd, 1958, died April 15th, 2022. April 15th, 2022. I remembered that day very well. It was then that I received a call from my sister Judith informing me of the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I packed my bags and left for Oak Ridge the next day to be near the only family member who truly loved me. This is a misunderstanding, I said. I was in Oak Ridge nursing my sick sister. She died 6 months ago, and I decided to come home. Officer Brody checked the data on his clipboard again. It said the death certificate was issued by the Clarksburg City Morgue. Cause of death was a heart attack. But that's absurd. My voice shook. I'm alive. You can see that. Brody looked at me with sympathy. Mrs. Winslow, have you ever heard of identity theft? I shook my head negatively, though I knew what he was getting at. Sometimes people use the data of other people, often deceased, to get loans, to make documents. Someone might have used your data, but I knew they weren't. A chill ran through my body as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in my head. My house, I whispered. Someone is living in my house. Officer Brody nodded. According to the database, the house at 23 Elm Street is now owned by the Foster family. They bought it 2.5 years ago. My head spun. I hadn't even sold the house. How is that possible? Who, who handled my death? I asked, already guessing the answer. Brody flipped through the information on his tablet. Your daughter, Alice Langtry, filed the papers. She was listed as next of kin. Alice, my own daughter, declared me dead. A lump came to my throat, and I covered my mouth with my hand to hold back a scream. It's impossible, I whispered. Why would she do that? But deep down, I knew why. My house was the only valuable possession I had. Alice had always thought she was entitled to more than I could give. Mrs. Winslow, we need to go down to the station to look into this situation, Brody said softly. It might just be a bug in the system, but we both knew it wasn't a mistake. As we drove to the police station, I thought back to our last conversation with my daughter. It was just before I left for Oak Ridge. You always pick anyone but me, Alice had yelled when I informed her I was leaving to care for my sister. Aunt Judith has always been more precious to you than your own daughter. You're selfish, Mother, always have been. And then she slammed the door and left, leaving me in an empty house with a half-assembled suitcase. I called her the next day before I left, but she didn't answer. Then there were occasional short conversations, then silence. And now it turns out that all this time she thought I was dead. No, she hadn't. She'd buried me herself. At the station, I was led into a small office. The chief of police, a heavy-set man with tired eyes named Abbott, studied my papers for a long time, making phone calls, checking data. This is a very unusual situation, Mrs. Winslow, he said at last. I've never encountered anything like this before. I want to know what happened to my house, I said firmly, and how my daughter was able to pronounce me dead. Abbott sighed. According to the documents, your daughter presented a death certificate issued by the city morgue. Then, as the sole heir, she stepped in to inherit the property. A few months later, The house was sold to the foster family. But how could she have gotten a death certificate, I wondered. I'm not dead. We'll find out, Abbott assured me. But right now we need to establish your identity. Do you have any other documents? Medical records? Insurance? I rummaged through my bag and pulled out the stack of papers I always carried with me. An insurance policy, some old bills, a bank card. Abbott scrutinized it all. We'll check all these documents, but I'm afraid the resurrection process can take time. Bureaucracy, you know. And where would I live in the meantime? I asked, feeling a wave of fatigue coming over me. My house is occupied and I don't have much money. Abbott rubbed his chin. We have a social program for people in difficult situations. We can get you temporary housing at the Pine Forest Motel outside of town. It's not a five-star hotel, of course, but it's clean and safe. I nodded. I didn't have much choice. And my daughter? I asked, clenching my fists. What will happen to her? If everything you've told me checks out, she'll face serious charges, Abbott said. Fraud, forgery, misappropriation of property. But first, we have to investigate. I sat stunned by all this information. My own daughter hadn't just estranged herself from me. She'd erased me from her life. She declared me dead, sold my house, taking the money. What else did she do in the 3 years I was presumed dead? Mrs. Winslow, Abbott said softly, I'm sorry you're going through this, especially after losing your sister. I looked up. There was genuine sympathy in his gaze. Thank you, I said. But what I need right now isn't sympathy, it's justice, and a roof over my head. Abbott nodded and called Officer Brody to take me to the motel. As we drove through the familiar streets of Clarksburg, I stared out the window at the houses, stores, and parks floating by. Everything so familiar and yet so foreign at the same time. My city was no longer mine. My home was no longer mine. And my daughter, she was never really mine. At the Pine Forest Motel, I was assigned a small room with a bed, a table, and a tiny bathroom. Clean but impersonal, like the rest of my current life. I set my suitcase against the wall and sat on the bed, feeling my strength leaving me. 3 years ago, I'd left Clarksburg to support my dying sister. I came back to a town where I was dead myself. Irony of fate? Or a calculated plan by my own daughter? I pulled an old photograph out of my bag. Alice at the age of 10, with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. She had once been my little girl. When did it all go wrong? It was beginning to get dark outside the window. Tomorrow I had a long day ahead of me at the police station. Interrogations, background checks, uniforms. The beginning of the road to reclaiming my stolen life. I lay on the hard bed without undressing. I couldn't sleep. Officer Brody's words echoed in my head. Your daughter declared you dead 3 years ago. 3 years I had lived without realizing I was already buried. 3 years my daughter knew I was out there somewhere, but chose to think I was dead. And now it was up to me to find out why. The morning at the Pine Forest Motel greeted me with dim light filtering through the worn curtains. I spent a restless night falling into sleep and waking up again with a heavy heart. My own daughter had pronounced me dead. The thought would not settle in my mind, no matter how many times I repeated it. I slowly rose from the bed, wrinkling my aching joints. At 67, every morning is a reminder that youth is long behind us, especially in a cheap motel bed. After washing my face with cold water, I took a long look at my reflection in the cracked mirror. The usual face of an older woman wrinkles around her eyes, gray hair, slightly sagging cheeks. A living face, not the face of a dead woman. At 9 o'clock sharp, Officer Brody came to pick me up. He looked rested and alert, which only emphasized my exhaustion. How are you feeling, Mrs. Winslow? He asked, opening the patrol car door for me. Like a man who found out he'd been buried alive, I replied, trying to smile. It came out crooked. Brody nodded, not knowing what to say. His gaze was sympathetic and awkward at the same time. We were silent on the way back to the station. I looked out the window at the morning Clarksburg mothers taking their children to school, workers hurrying to their offices, elderly people walking their dogs, ordinary life running its course, a life from which I was cut out. At the police station, Chief Abbott was waiting for us. Sitting next to him was a thin man in a suit with a notepad. Mrs. Winslow, this is Detective Lamont. Abbott introduced him. He'll be handling your case. Lamont shook my hand, dry but firm. Good morning. I'll admit that in 20 years on the job, I've never investigated a resurrection case, he said with a slight smile. But I intend to get to the bottom of it. We were seated in a small room with a long table and a few chairs. Lamont spread out the papers before him. Now, Mrs. Winslow, I've read the preliminary information. First, we need to establish the sequence of events. You left Clarksburg. April 15th, 2022, I confirmed. My sister Judith Carmichael had called the day before with the news that she had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I packed up and left for Oak Ridge, where she lived. Lamont wrote something down in his notebook. Did you still have tickets, checks, anything to confirm your departure? I shook my head. It's been 3 years, but I'm sure the bus company's database must have information. I took the Continental bus. We'll check it out. Lamont nodded. What happened next? Did you keep in touch with your daughter? I sighed, thinking back to those first weeks. I'd called her a few times in the first month. The conversations were short. Alice always found an excuse to end the conversation quickly. Then she stopped answering the phone. I thought she needed time. We didn't break up on good terms. What do you mean? Lamont asked. I sighed, searching for words. How to describe decades of a complicated relationship with my own daughter. Alice had always been demanding ever since she was a little girl. When she turned 16, her father, my ex-husband Herbert, left us. She never forgave me for not being able to hold on to him. Then there were the constant complaints that I worked too much, that I didn't pay enough attention to her, that I didn't help her financially, even though I gave her everything I could. Lamont listened attentively, not interrupting. The last few years before I left, our relationship had become strained, especially after she married Raymond Langtree, her present husband. He was constantly embarking on some dubious business projects and asking me for money for development. I said no, and it made Alice angry. When was the last time you spoke to your daughter? Lamont asked. I racked my memory. About 2 months after I left. It was June 2022. I called to wish her a happy birthday. The conversation was cold. She never returned my calls again. Lamont made another entry. According to the records, your death certificate was issued on July 7th, 2022. Cause of death was acute heart failure. The certificate was signed by Dr. Hawks of the Clarksburg City Morgue. I felt a chill run down my spine. But how is that possible? Where was my body? That's just it, Lamont replied grimly. According to the paperwork, your body was cremated at your daughter's request. No other relatives were called for identification. And my sister? I asked. According to the paperwork, she was too ill to travel to Clarksburg. Your identity was only confirmed by your daughter. I shook my head, stunned by the cynicism of this plan. This Dr. Hawks, he must have seen the body. How could he have signed the certificate? Lamont exchanged glances with Abbott. We've already contacted the city morgue. Unfortunately, Dr. Hawks quit about a year ago and moved to Florida. We're trying to track him down. Do you suspect he was in cahoots with my daughter? I asked him directly. We're considering all the possibilities at the moment. Lamont replied diplomatically. But I must admit that the scheme looks well thought out. Abbott, who had been silent until then, spoke up. Mrs. Winslow, we've also checked your property information. The Elm Street house was indeed sold by your daughter in October 2022 to the Foster family for $230,000. The transaction was legally executed through a notary public. $230,000? I questioned. But my house is worth at least 300. That's what the deed said, Abbott confirmed. What about my savings? I asked, feeling my anxiety rising inside me. I had an account at the First National Bank of Clarksburg, where I kept my modest savings, about $70,000 set aside during my years as a school cafeteria administrator. Lamont looked into his records again. According to our records, all of the funds in your account were withdrawn in August of 2022. Your daughter, as the heir, gained access to the account upon presentation of the death certificate. I closed my eyes. $70,000, all of my old age savings, the money I'd set aside in bits and pieces, denying myself everything. Gone. What else did she take? I asked, afraid to hear the answer. We're still looking into it, Lamont replied, but preliminary information indicates that your personal belongings were sold as well. In September 2022, in the local newspaper, was published an announcement of the sale of property in connection with the move of the new owners of the house. My belongings, photographs, letters, books, clothes, the furniture I had so carefully chosen, the collection of porcelain figurines I'd collected all my life. It's all gone. They sold everything, I whispered. They erased me from my life completely. There was a heavy silence in the room. Officer Brody, sitting in the corner, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mrs. Winslow, Lamont said at last, we'll need to take a formal statement from you, but first I'd like to understand your situation better. Tell me more about your daughter and son-in-law. What was your relationship like? Were they having financial problems? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Alice has always been a difficult child. Even as a child, she was able to manipulate people to get what she wanted. Herbert, her father, spoiled her, and when he left us, she hated me, believed I was responsible for the destruction of the family. I was silent, remembering those difficult years, the lonely nights, the 2 jobs to provide for us, the constant rebukes from my daughter. After high school, Alice tried college but dropped out after a semester. Then there were random jobs, a string of suitors. She was always looking for the easy way out. At 32, she married Raymond. It's her 5th marriage. What do you know about Raymond Langtry? Lamont asked. I grimaced. Not much. He's about 10 years younger than Alice. Handsome, suave, good at making an impression. But behind that facade, he never stayed in any job for more than a couple months. Always talking about some big business plan, but nothing concrete. A couple times he asked me for money to invest in his projects. First some smartphone app, then importing rare teas. I turned him down. How long have they been married? Lamont continued. About 5 years, I replied. But for the last 2 years before I left, I rarely saw them. Alice always found an excuse to cancel or shorten a visit. Lamont made another note. Were they having financial problems? I wondered. They never talked about it directly. But a month before I left, Alice came to see me. She was kind of nervous, anxious, hinted that she and Raymond needed money for some urgent project, some unique opportunity. When I asked for details, she refused to explain. She asked to borrow $50,000. I said no. That was almost all of my savings. How did she react? Lamont asked. I remembered that night the flushed face of Alice, her harsh words. She was furious, yelling that I'd never supported her, that I was selfish, that I didn't deserve a daughter like her. And then she said something. She said, Someday you'll regret saying no to me. There was a heavy silence in the room. I didn't think much of it at the time. I continued. Alice used to say things like that when she was angry. But now it sounds like a threat, Lamont finished for me. When exactly did this conversation take place? At the end of March 2022, I answered, a couple of weeks before Judith's call. Lamont and Abbott exchanged glances. Mrs. Winslow, said Abbott, I'm afraid the picture is not a pretty one. It seems to me that your daughter and her husband have planned this in advance. Perhaps your going to your sister's house was an opportunity for them. I nodded, feeling strangely numb. The shock of the first day had been replaced by a cold clarity. They were waiting for me to leave so they could bury me. Lamont cleared his throat. Mrs. Winslow, we need to ask a few more questions. First, why didn't you contact your daughter after she stopped answering the phone? Didn't try to find her through acquaintances, neighbors? I chuckled bitterly. Judith was getting worse. I was with her around the clock. I fed her, washed her, gave her medicine, took her to procedures. I just didn't have the energy to confront my daughter. And then, I have to admit, it was easier for me to think that Alice was just hurt than to admit that she hated me. Why didn't you come back to Clarksburg sooner? Abbott asked. Your sister died. 6 months ago, I confirmed. March 23rd. I needed time to recover. Judith had left me some money, about $15,000. I was planning to start a small business here in Clarksburg, a bakery or a cafe. Where did you live for 6 months? Lamont asked. I stayed at Judith's house in Oak Ridge. It was mortgaged to the bank, and after she died, the foreclosure process began. The bank gave me until September 1st to vacate the premises. Lamont recorded that information too. Can you produce your sister's death certificate? It would help corroborate your testimony. I nodded and pulled a folder of documents out of my bag. There's the death certificate, the will, the house papers. I brought copies of everything I might need to file an inheritance. Lamont looked through the papers and nodded satisfied. That's very helpful. Now we'll need to take your official statement and start the process of restoring your identity. This will take some time. We'll have to contact federal agencies, get new documents, and reconstruct your history. What about my house? What about my money? I asked, already knowing the answer. Abbott wrinkled his nose. Unfortunately, the situation is complicated. The Foster family had bought the house legally. There was no wrongdoing on their part. To challenge the deal, we'd have to prove that your daughter and the coroner colluded. Even then, the process could take years. I clenched my fists. What about my daughter and her husband? Would they just get away with it? Absolutely not, Lamont said firmly. If everything checks out, they'll face serious charges. Fraud, forgery, grand larceny. That's jail time, Mrs. Winslow. Prison. My daughter is in prison. Strangely, the thought didn't stir up any emotion in me. Maybe I'm just too tired of being betrayed. What do I do now? I asked. We'll take your statement now, Lamont answered. Then we'll start the official investigation. You'll have to stay in Clarksburg during that time. The city will pay for you to stay in a motel for another week, and then I'll take it from there. I finished for him. I have the money my sister left me. I'll find a place to stay. Good, Lamont nodded. One more thing, Mrs. Winslow. While the investigation is going on, I wouldn't recommend that you contact your daughter on your own. We'll talk to her ourselves when we've gathered enough evidence. I nodded, though inside I wanted to look Alice in the eye and ask, why? Why did you do it? I spent the next 2 hours testifying, answering dozens of questions, signing papers, telling everything over and over again. Finally, when it was over, Abbott held out his hand to me. Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Winslow. We will do everything we can to bring justice. I shook his hand and stood up, feeling squeezed like a lemon. Officer Brody will take you back to the motel, Abbott said. We'll contact you as soon as we have news. By the time Brody and I got outside, it was past noon. The sun was high, but all I felt was cold inside. "You're doing great, Mrs. Winslow," Brody said as he opened the patrol car door. "I don't have a choice, officer," I replied. "When your own daughter is burying you alive, all you can do is grit your teeth and move on." On the way to the motel, I looked out at the streets of Clarksburg, at the people going about their business, and thought about how many more such stories lurked behind the closed doors of neat little houses. How many betrayals, deceptions, disappointments. Alice, my only daughter, I remembered her as a child, laughing with sparkling eyes when I brought her a bicycle for her 10th birthday. As a teenager, withdrawn, resentful of the world after her father left. As a young woman, ambitious but impatient, always looking for the easy way out. When did it all go wrong? Where did I go wrong in raising her? Or was it her conscious choice to betray her own mother for money? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Alice had always been like this. I just didn't want to see it. A mother believes in her child to the end, even when everything points to the contrary. But now the rose-colored glasses were finally off. My daughter is a fraud who stole my life, and I will do whatever it takes to get justice. I spent 3 days in the Pine Forest Motel, contemplating my situation. The police called. Detective Lamont said he'd launched a formal investigation. They had found Dr. Hawks in Florida and were going to question him, but the process moved slowly, too slowly for me. On the fourth day, I realized I couldn't wait any longer. I needed answers, right now, from the source, from my daughter. I remembered Alice's address well. 3 years ago, she and Raymond had bought a house in Clarksburg's new neighborhood, Heather Hills. Raymond bragged that it was a prestigious place. The house was beyond their means, large, 2-story, with a well-kept garden. Alice said at the time that they'd taken out a mortgage. Now I understood where the money had really come from. I hailed a cab and gave the address, Strawberry Street, 44. My heart was pounding as the car approached their neighborhood. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't know how I'd react when I saw my daughter's face, but I knew I had to do it. The cab pulled up in front of a neat 2-story Victorian-style house. Freshly painted white facade, wrought iron fence, immaculate lawn. Everything screamed prosperity. My well-being stolen by my own daughter. "Dash, wait for me, please," I asked the cabbie. "I won't be long." The driver nodded, showing no particular interest. I squared my shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. The bell rang melodiously. Through the thin curtains, I could see movement inside the house. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. The door opened and I saw Alice, my daughter, my flesh and blood. She's 45, but she looks younger, slim, trim, in an expensive house suit. Her blonde hair is neatly styled, and her face has perfect makeup. Her face showed polite interest for a split second. Then her eyes widened and her mouth opened in a mute scream. "Hi, Alice," I said calmly. "Aren't you going to invite your mother into the house?" She recoiled as if she'd seen a ghost. Well, technically, I was back from the world she'd sent me to. Mom?" She whispered. Are you alive?" "As you can see," I answered, taking a step forward. "Surprised?" Alice staggered back and grabbed the door jamb. "But how, you can't be here?" "And yet here I am," I said, entering the house uninvited. "I think we have a lot to talk about, daughter." The interior of the house was astonishingly luxurious. Expensive furniture, crystal chandeliers, paintings in heavy frames. I went into the living room and sat in an armchair, looking at all this splendor. How much had all this decor cost? $230,000 from the sale of my house, plus $70,000 of my savings? No, it was a lot more than that. Alice stood in the doorway, still stunned. Her face was white as chalk. Where have you been all this time? She finally squeezed out. Where I said I would be, at Oak Ridge with your Aunt Judith, I answered. The question is different, Alice. Why did you think I was dead? Yeah, we. She started to stammer, but quickly pulled herself together. Her face suddenly changed from shock to calculation. We received a message that you were dead. From Judith's neighbors? Really? I raised an eyebrow. And you didn't bother to check it out for yourself. You didn't go to Oak Ridge, try to find your mother's body? Alice pressed her lips together. I was shocked. And then, you know how I feel about death, funerals. Oh, yes, I nodded. So bad that you decided to cremate my non-existent body. How convenient. Alice visibly tensed. What do you want from me? The truth, I answered simply. Why did you do it? Why did you declare me dead, sell my house, take my money? I don't know what you mean. Stop it. I slapped my hand on the arm of the chair. No more lies. I've been to the police, Alice. I saw the documents, the death certificate you got, the deed to my house, my bank statements. Everything points to you. That's when Raymond walked into the living room. My son-in-law is about 35, tall, handsome, with dark hair and the looks of a movie actor, but his cold stare has always disgusted me. Beatrice? He froze when he saw me. How is that possible? Here comes the second conspirator. I turned to him. Surprised, Raymond? Didn't expect the dead woman to come back for her goods? Raymond glanced quickly at Alice. I could almost physically feel them frantically strategizing. We need to talk, Raymond finally said, turning to Alice. Alone. Oh no, I objected. No secrets. You both declared me dead and stole everything I had. Now we'll talk here and now. Raymond clenched his fists, but held back. Alice took a deep breath and sat down in the chair across from me. Okay, she said, suddenly changing tactics. Yes, we did it. And you know what? I have no regrets. Her bluntness stunned me. I'd expected further denial, excuses, but not this. You don't regret declaring your mother dead? I asked quietly. No, Alice cut me off. You were dead to me a long time ago, Mom, when you left me for Aunt Judith, like you always did, putting everyone before your daughter. I shook my head. I went to take care of my dying sister. It was my duty. What about your duty to me? Alice raised her voice. All your life you've put others before me. First, your job 2 shifts in the school cafeteria, always tired, always busy. Then your stupid courses, your part-time jobs. Then Aunt Judith. I did all that to provide for us after your father left, I objected. So you'd have a roof over your head, food, and education. What about love? Attention? Alice stepped forward. You were always cold, always distant. I grew up feeling like I was a burden to you. That's not true. I felt a lump come up in my throat. I loved you with all my heart. I just didn't know how to show it. Alice laughed bitterly. Of course you did. The classic excuse. I didn't know how to show love. You know what I think? You just didn't love me, ever. Her words hit me harder than a slap in the face. I opened my mouth to object, but Raymond interrupted us. Enough of this family drama. Let's get down to business. What exactly do you want, Beatrice? I shifted my gaze to my son-in-law. I want to know why. Why would you take such a risk? Forgery of a death certificate? Fraud? They're felonies. We needed money, Raymond answered simply. Big money. Fast. For what? I looked around their lavish living room. For all this? For business, Raymond answered. I got a chance to enter into a partnership with big investors, importing exotic wood from South America, exclusive supply rights, but I needed seed money, $300,000. And you decided to take it from me. I shook my head. Why didn't you just ask? We did, Alice exclaimed. A month before you left. But you said no. You always do. I remembered that conversation. Indeed, Alice had come to ask to borrow $50,000 for some promising project of Raymond's, but it was nowhere near $300,000. You asked for $50,000, not 300, I objected. And you didn't explain why you wanted that amount of money. And your previous promising projects had always failed because you never gave us enough. Raymond slammed his fist on the table. 50,000 was just the beginning. We knew you'd say no if you asked for more right away. And when I said no, you decided to eliminate me? I asked, feeling my insides grow cold. Alice and Raymond looked at each other. We didn't plan it in advance, Alice said finally. But when you went to Judith's, Raymond suggested the idea. You didn't return our calls. No one saw you in Clarksburg. Perfect opportunity. And you bribed the coroner, I continued, remembering Detective Lamont's words. Raymond grinned. Dr. Hawks is not a man of principle, especially when $20,000 is at stake. Where did you get that kind of money? I asked. We borrowed it from the right people, Raymond answered evasively, with the condition of quick repayment. I began to get the picture. You went into debt to bribe the coroner. You got the death certificate. Then you sold my house and took my savings to pay off your creditors and invest in your business. That's right, Raymond nodded. And you know what? It worked. Our business is booming. We supply mahogany and teak to the largest furniture factories in the country. At the expense of my life, I said quietly. You didn't just steal my money and my house. You stole my identity, my existence. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Alice said. You were at Oak Ridge taking care of your precious Judith. You had no time for Clarksburg. And when Judith died? I asked. You didn't think I might come back? Honestly, Alice shrugged her shoulders. No, we thought you'd stay there, get a job, make new friends. After all, there was nothing keeping you here, not even your daughter. Her words were soaked with the venom of years of resentment. I looked at her and didn't recognize her. This cold, calculating woman couldn't be my little girl to whom I'd once read bedtime stories. What are you going to do now? Alice asked. Report us to the police? Send your daughter to jail? I've already been to the police, I answered. They've started an investigation. Raymond's face twitched. What exactly do they know? Everything, I replied, about the forged death certificate, about the sale of the house, about the withdrawal of money from my account. They've already found Dr. Hawks in Florida, and they're going to question him. Raymond stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. This can't be happening. Hawks isn't going to talk. We have an agreement. You underestimate the fear of prison, I said. Do you think he'll keep your secret if he's facing time for forgery? Raymond turned around, a dangerous light in his eyes. We can make a deal, Beatrice. You came here for a reason. What do you want? Money? We can pay. How much? I got up slowly from my chair. Do you really think everything can be bought? That I'd sell my life for a check? Everyone has a price, Raymond replied coldly. Name yours. What about justice? I asked. What about the fact that you ruined my life? Destroyed everything I spent years building? Sold my personal belongings, my photographs, my memories? They're just things. Raymond brushed them aside. They can be replaced. Not everything, I said quietly. Pictures of my parents, letters, jewelry that had been passed down in our family for generations. All of it you sold at a rummage sale. Alice looked away. For a moment, I thought something flashed in her eyes. A shadow of shame, perhaps? But she quickly got over it. We can compensate you for your losses, she said. Name the amount. I'm not for sale, I said firmly. And you won't buy me. Then why are you here? Alice asked irritably. What do you want from us? I took a deep breath. I wanted to see your face when you realized your plan had failed. I wanted to hear you explain why your own daughter decided to bury me alive. I already told you, we needed the money. Alice shrugged. It wasn't personal? Nothing personal? I grinned bitterly. Alice, you declared your mother dead. How can it be nothing personal? It's always too personal for you, Mom. Alice leaned back in her chair. It was business, a cold calculation. You had the resources we needed. You refused to share willingly. We found another way. You broke the law, I reminded you. So? Raymond intervened. Do you think the police will be able to prove anything? Hawks won't talk. We'll take care of that. The documents are authentic, with real signatures and seals. Your house was sold legally. The money's long gone. The best you can do is get your identity back. But get your property back? I don't think so. I looked at him carefully. Are you so sure of your impunity? Absolutely. Raymond smiled a cold smile. But we're willing to compromise. Say $50,000 in exchange for forgetting about all this. Start a new life somewhere away from Clarksburg. $50,000? I asked again. My house was worth $300, plus 70 in the account. That's our final offer, Raymond said. Take it or leave it. I stared at him for a long moment, then turned my gaze back to Alice. You know what the saddest thing about this whole thing is? I said quietly. That you really believe that I didn't love you. That I put work, money, other people before you. Alice was silent, looking away. Everything I did, working to exhaustion, saving money, giving up my personal life, it was all for you, I continued, so that you could have what I didn't have: a good home, an education, opportunities. I wanted you to grow up to be a strong, independent woman. And raised a selfish bitch who declared you dead for money. Alice finished, grinning suddenly. Ironic, isn't it? Her cynicism struck me. Was this woman really my daughter? Had I made such a mistake raising her? Well, I said, rising. I'd heard everything I wanted to hear. Detective Lamont will be thrilled to hear what we have to say. Raymond tensed. What do you mean? I pulled a small tape recorder out of my bag, an old one, but still working. I pressed the stop button and waved it in front of Alice and Raymond's faces. A full confession to fraud, forgery, and theft, plus a mention of bribing the coroner. I think that will be enough for a trial. Raymond's face turned pale, then sharply red with anger. He rushed toward me. Give it to me at once. I retreated to the door. Don't even think about touching me. Attacking an elderly woman will add a few more years to your sentence. You're bluffing. Alice jumped up from her chair. This old junk can't work, and you couldn't have known in advance that we'd confess. I knew my daughter, I replied sadly. I knew that your pride and self-confidence wouldn't let you deny it. You always wanted to prove you were smarter than everyone else, more cunning than everyone else. Even now, you can't resist bragging about how cleverly you fooled your old mother. Alice froze, stunned. For the first time, I saw uncertainty on her face. What now? She asked quietly. Now I go to the police, I said, heading for the exit. And I suggest you get a good lawyer. You'll need one. Raymond blocked my way. You're not going anywhere with that tape. Back off, I said firmly. There's a cab waiting for me outside. The driver knows where I'm going. If I don't get out in a minute, he'll call the police. Raymond hesitated. I could see various scenarios running through his mind, none of them ending well for him. Let him go, Alice said suddenly. It's no use. Raymond turned to her. Are you crazy? She'll send us to jail. She's bluffing. Alice repeated, but her voice was no longer as confident as before. And even if she isn't, what can we do? Forcefully take the tape recorder away? That would only make things worse. I looked at my daughter carefully. She seemed so much like me at that moment. The same calculating gaze, the same ability to assess the situation coolly, even at a critical moment. You're right, I said. Violence will only make things worse for you. Goodbye, Alice. I hope the prison bunk is more comfortable than the bed your mother slept in while you thought she was dead. I walked out of the house, leaving them standing in a daze. The cab was indeed waiting for me. I asked the driver to wait, promising a good tip. To the police station, please, I said, getting into the back seat. The car started and I looked back at the house where my daughter had stayed. My only daughter who had declared me dead for money. The recorder in my hand was old, with worn buttons. I turned on the playback to check the quality of the recording. The voices came out of the speaker, clear, uninterrupted. All the confessions, all the details of the conspiracy, everything was recorded. It would be more than enough for a trial. Detective Lamont was amazed to hear the tape of my conversation with Alice and Raymond. He scrolled through the most important points several times. The confession to bribing the coroner, to forging documents, to misappropriating my property. That's a terrific piece of evidence, Mrs. Winslow, he said, turning off the tape recorder. But I must warn you, you've put yourself at serious risk. A confrontation like this could have ended very badly. I shrugged. I'm 67 years old, Detective. My own daughter declared me dead and stole everything I had. What else do I have to lose? Lamont nodded understandingly. Nevertheless, I ask you to take no further independent action. This is now a matter for the police. He explained that, based on my testimony and the audio recording, they would request an arrest warrant for Alice and Raymond, as well as a search of their home and office. The process could take days, but Lamont was confident of success. What about restoring my identity? I asked. I'm still officially dead, right? Unfortunately, yes, Lamont answered, and it's not a quick or easy process. You'll need a lawyer who specializes in such cases. I sighed. I didn't have money for an expensive lawyer, just the $15,000 Judith had left me. But I had no choice. Can you recommend anyone? Lamont thought for a moment. There is one man, Daniel Prescott. He's older, but he's still practicing. He specializes in family law, but I know he's had experience with similar cases. A few years ago, he helped a man who was reported missing by his wife to get an insurance claim. I know Daniel, I nodded. He knew my ex-husband, finalized our divorce 20 years ago. All the better, Lamont smiled. It'll make things easier. I can get in touch with him if you want. I agreed, and Lamont dialed the number immediately. After a short conversation, he told me that Prescott was ready to meet me tomorrow morning. Back at the motel, I spent a sleepless night. The events of the last few days replayed over and over in my mind, the shock of the news of my death, the meeting with Alice, her cold confession. How could my own daughter do this to me? Where had I gone wrong in raising her? I dressed carefully in the morning, choosing the most decent of my outfits, a dark blue dress and jacket I'd brought from Oak Ridge. I needed to make a good impression on the lawyer. Prescott's office was in an old building in downtown Clarksburg. A small sign read, Daniel Prescott, Attorney at Law. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The reception area was as old-fashioned as the owner himself, wood paneling on the walls, heavy leather chairs, shelves of leather-bound books. Behind the desk sat an elderly receptionist who ushered me into the office as soon as I called my name. Daniel Prescott hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same straight posture, neatly trimmed gray hair, and shrewd blue eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He must have been about 75, but he looked trim and energetic. Beatrice, he stood up and shook my hand. I was shocked when Detective Lamont told me about your situation. Thank you for seeing me, Daniel, I replied, sitting down in the chair he offered me. Your case is unusual, Prescott said, flipping through the papers on his desk. I'd say it's unique, but it's not hopeless. He asked me to tell the whole story from the beginning: my departure for Oak Ridge, my care for my sister, my lack of contact with my daughter, my return to Clarksburg, and my shocking discovery. So, your daughter and her husband confessed to the fraud, and the police have an audio recording, he summarized. That's good. The criminal case against them looks pretty solid. What about restoring my identity? I asked. And is it possible to get my house back? My money? Prescott took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Let's go in order. Identity restoration is a complicated process, but it's doable. We'll have to apply to the court to recognize that you're alive. We'll need witnesses, medical examinations, document checks. But given the circumstances, the record of your daughter's confession, I'm sure the court will side with us. I nodded. Something good. As for the house, Prescott continued, the situation is more complicated. The Foster family bought it legally through a realtor with all the necessary paperwork. They are an innocent third party in this story. But the house was sold under false documents, I objected. Doesn't that invalidate the transaction? Not exactly. Prescott shook his head. The Fosters didn't know and couldn't have known that the deeds were forged. They were acting in good faith. To invalidate the deal, we'd have to sue them, prove that the original documents were invalid, and then demand that the sale be rescinded. It's a long process with an uncertain outcome, and frankly, unfair to the Fosters. I felt my insides tighten. My home, my only refuge, lost forever? Are there other options? I asked quietly. There are. Prescott nodded. We can file a civil suit against your daughter and son-in-law for the value of the house plus moral damages. If the criminal case ends in a conviction, the civil suit has a good chance of success. The court will order them to pay you compensation. And if they don't have that kind of money? I asked, remembering Raymond saying that the money from the sale of the house had long been invested in the business. Then the court can seize their property, their business, their future earnings, Prescott replied. It's not an instant judgment, but in the long run, you'll get your money, either in a lump sum if they have that amount, or in installments over several years. I wondered, the prospect of years of getting money from the daughter who had betrayed me didn't look appealing. On the other hand, I had no choice. I needed the funds to start a new life. What about my bank accounts? I asked. That's easier, Prescott replied. Once your identity is restored, we'll ask the bank to reinstate your account. Considering that the withdrawal was made on the basis of forged documents, the bank will probably agree. If not, we'll file a lawsuit. But the money has already been spent, I said. Right, Prescott nodded. But unlike private individuals, the bank has insurance against such cases. They'll reimburse you for your loss, and then they'll collect the money from the guilty parties. I was slightly relieved. At least my savings could be returned. How long will this whole process take? I asked. Prescott sighed. Identity restoration is 1 to 3 months, assuming the court accepts our application quickly. Civil suit, 6 months to a year, possibly longer if there are appeals. Bank account restoration, about a month after identity restoration. 3 months, 6 months, a year? That's a long time. That's a long time for someone my age. Where am I supposed to live during that time? I asked. The city would only pay for a motel for the rest of the week. I've been thinking about that too. Prescott nodded. I have a small apartment over the garage in my building. No one's lived there for a long time. The kids are grown and gone. If you want, you can stay there while we work out your legal problems. The rent is symbolic. I was touched by his offer. That's very generous of you, Daniel. It's nothing. He waved his hand. I remember you helping my wife with a fundraiser for an orphanage years ago. Caroline always spoke warmly of you. I remembered his wife, an energetic, kind woman who organized to help children in need. How is she now? Alas, Caroline died 5 years ago. Prescott answered quietly. Lung cancer. She never smoked, can you imagine? I'm sorry, I said sincerely. Prescott nodded and quickly returned to a businesslike tone. As for payment for my services, we can agree on installments or a contingent fee, which you will pay after receiving compensation from the daughter. I have some money, I said. $15,000 my sister left me. Will that be enough? More than enough, Prescott smiled. My rates aren't as high as those of young lawyers in big firms. And I always make a discount for family, friends. I felt warm inside. Maybe there are still people in this cold world who are willing to lend a hand. We discussed the details of the process ahead. Prescott explained what documents I would need, what witnesses we would bring in, how we would build a defense. He was methodical and thorough, qualities I valued in a man. There's one other thing that worries me, Prescott said when we were done discussing the legal aspects. Your emotional state. What you've been through is a serious psychological trauma. The betrayal of a loved one, the loss of property, having to prove that you're alive, it's hard. I wanted to object, to say I was coping, but the words stuck in my throat. Tears came to my eyes. I know a good psychologist, Prescott continued softly, Dr. Eleanor Moss. She specializes in trauma related to family relationships. Maybe you should talk to her. I shook my head. Thank you, but no. I can handle it. I always have. Prescott looked at me carefully. Beatrice, you're a strong woman. I remember you from when your husband left you alone with the baby. You did well then. But what's happening now is different. Sometimes even the strongest people need help. I stayed silent, staring out the window at the busy Clarksburg street. People were going about their business, unaware of the dramas playing out around them. Think about it, Prescott said, without insisting. Now, if you don't mind, we could go to my place, and I'll show you the apartment. It's fully furnished, so you can move in today. I agreed, and we went to his place, an old Victorian mansion on a quiet street in a respectable neighborhood in Clarksburg. The apartment above the garage was cozy and clean. Living room, bedroom, small kitchen and bathroom. Everything you need for living. My son lived here while he was in college, Prescott explained. For the last 5 years, the apartment has been empty. Sometimes friends or relatives stay here when they come to visit. It's perfect, I said, looking around the rooms. How much do you want for rent? Let's call it a mutual favor, Prescott replied. You'll help look after the house when I'm away. Sometimes water the flowers, pick up the mail. Wouldn't you agree? I nodded, feeling that fate had finally turned its back on me. That evening, I moved my few belongings from the motel to my new home. The apartment was quiet and bright, overlooking a well-kept garden, a true oasis of calm after all I had been through. The next few days were spent preparing documents for court. Prescott worked quickly and efficiently. He gathered all the necessary certificates from Oak Ridge to prove that I had indeed been there for the past 3 years, caring for my sick sister. He found witnesses, Judith's neighbors, the hospice nurse, the bank clerk who had helped me with the inheritance after my sister's death. At the same time, Detective Lamont reported that the process of arresting Alice and Raymond had begun. A judge had issued a search warrant for their home and the company's office. They found documents proving collusion with the coroner, money transfer receipts, drafts of a forged death certificate. Pressured by the evidence, Dr. Hawks began cooperating with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. It's going well, Lamont said when he called me with the news. There's more than enough evidence. Your daughter and son-in-law deny everything, but the tape of their confession and the coroner's report speak for themselves. I listened to his report with a strange numbness. Until a week ago, I had been eager to see justice done, to punish the traitors. Now I felt only fatigue and emptiness. Prescott insisted I see a psychologist after all. Dr. Eleanor Moss was a pleasant middle-aged woman with attentive eyes and a soothing voice. "What you're feeling is normal," she said after I told her my story. "You have experienced betrayal from the person closest to you. It's comparable to the grief of loss. You go through all the classic stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. I think I went straight to depression." I grinned bitterly. "Not exactly," Dr. Moss countered gently. "Your confrontation with your daughter was a stage of anger. A very healthy reaction, by the way. You didn't let yourself be broken. You fought back. I thought about what she said. What's next? How do move forward?" "Day by day," she answered simply. "You need time to process what happened, to integrate it into your life. Don't try to suppress the pain or pretend it didn't happen. Acknowledge your feelings, accept them. Easier said than done, but I promise to try." One morning, about 2 weeks after we started working with Prescott, I got a call from Detective Lamont. "Mrs. Winslow, I have some big news. We arrested your daughter and her husband last night. They're in custody now. They're scheduled for trial next week." "Thank you, Detective," I replied. Strangely, I felt neither satisfaction nor joy, only a dull ache in my heart. "There's something else," Lamont continued. "We've discovered that your former home is now for sale. The Foster family decided to move to another city and put it on the market 2 weeks ago. That news made me straighten up in my chair. For sale? My house." "Yes," Lamont confirmed. "I thought you might like to know. The price is $320,000. I sank back into the chair, feeling dizzy. "My house is for sale, the possibility of getting it back." But with what? Judith's $15,000 inheritance was a drop in the bucket compared to the amount being asked for. I thanked Lamont for the information and called Prescott. He arrived an hour later, and we discussed the news at length. "It's an interesting twist," he said. "If you had the means, you could buy the house back. It would solve a lot of problems." "But I don't have that kind of money," I sighed. "And I won't have it until the trial is over and the compensation from Alice and Raymond is settled." Prescott tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. "There is one other option. I could talk to the Fosters, explain the situation. Perhaps they would agree to meet with you." "Why? I don't understand. What difference would it make?" "Sometimes personal contact can open up new opportunities," Prescott replied. "Besides, you have a right to know what happened to your house, your things." I agreed, even though I didn't really understand what the meeting would bring. The next day, Prescott arranged a meeting with the Fosters at their my house. I was nervous as I approached the familiar building with the green roof. The fence was now dark blue, as I had noticed on my first day back in Clarksburg. The door was opened by a woman in her 40s, tall, with short brown hair and kind eyes. "Mrs. Winslow?" She held out her hand. "I'm Meredith Foster. Come in, please." I entered the house, and my heart ached with pain and nostalgia. The interior had changed, different furniture, different colors, different smells. But the walls, the ceiling, the arrangement of the rooms, it was all mine, native. A man about the same age, Paul Foster, Meredith's husband, was waiting for us in the living room. He said hello warmly, seated us in armchairs. Their teenage son introduced himself as Ethan and immediately disappeared upstairs. "Mr. Prescott told us your story," Meredith began as we settled in with cups of tea. "It's unbelievable. We're so sorry for what you've been through. We had no idea what was going on," Paul added. We were told the house was being sold after the owner died. All the paperwork was in order, and the realtor was very professional. I don't blame you, I said sincerely. You acted in good faith. When we moved in, there was almost nothing left, Meredith continued. The furniture and personal belongings had been sold at auction before we bought it. We only found a couple of boxes in the attic, some old books, photo albums. The realtor said we could throw them away, but I decided to keep them. Thought maybe relatives might want them. Albums? I stepped forward. With the pictures? Yes, Meredith nodded. Old family photos. I'll be right back. She went out and came back with two tattered albums that I recognized immediately. My albums, pictures of my parents, of my youth, of little Alice. They're yours, of course, Meredith said, handing them to me. And a few more books. I'll get them. I accepted the albums gently, tears welling up in my eyes. At least something of my past life had survived. We really sympathize with your situation, Paul said. And to be honest, we're a little uncomfortable with the idea of living in a house that's been, well, stolen from you. It's not your fault, I repeated. You bought it legally. Yes, but still. Paul exchanged glances with his wife, who had returned. We'd decided to move to Portland, new job. Better school for Ethan. The house is for sale. But now that we know the whole story, we'd like to offer to buy it back, Meredith finished. At the price we paid for it, $230,000. It's less than the market value now, but we think it's fair. I was shocked by their offer. These people, who were completely unfamiliar to me, showed such kindness and understanding. That's very generous of you, I said, struggling with excitement. But I don't have that kind of money. All my savings were stolen by my daughter. We understand, Meredith said softly. But maybe when the trial is over and you get compensation, it could take years, Prescott interjected. Litigation is never quick. Paul rubbed his chin thoughtfully. What if we made a preliminary agreement? You get the right to buy the house for, say, 2 years at a fixed price. We rent the house for that time, and when you get your compensation, you buy it back. Prescott perked up. That's an interesting proposition. Legally quite feasible. We could draw up a contract with a buyout option. I didn't know what to say. The prospect of getting my house back, even after a few years, filled me with a hope I hadn't felt since I'd returned to Clarksburg. Thank you, I finally said. It's more than I could have hoped for. It's just the right thing to do, Meredith replied simply. We want justice to be done. As we left, I took another look at my old house. Now I looked at it with hope. Maybe all is not lost. Maybe justice really is possible. When Prescott and I returned to his office after our meeting with the Fosters, an impressive file of documents was already on his desk. His assistant, a young lawyer named Clark, was shuffling impatiently from foot to foot. Mr. Prescott, while you were away, the results of the IRS inquiry came in, he said, and something else of interest from the Idaho Attorney General's office. Prescott raised an eyebrow. Idaho? I didn't make a request to Idaho. I know, sir, Clark nodded. They're the ones who contacted us. They found out about Mrs. Winslow's case from a national database and sent us information they thought might be relevant. Prescott gestured for me to sit down and opened the folder. I watched his face change as he read. First surprise, then understanding, then something like satisfaction. Unbelievable, he said at last. Beatrice, it seems your son-in-law Raymond Langtree is not who he says he is. What do you mean? I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. According to these documents, your son-in-law's real name is Richard Lester. He changed his name 8 years ago after moving from Idaho to our state. But why? I wondered. Because Richard Lester was convicted of fraud in Boise, Idaho in 2017, Prescott answered, looking through the paperwork. He created a fictitious investment company and defrauded several elderly investors out of a total of about $150,000. He got probation because he returned some of the money and made a deal with the investigation. I was stunned. All these years, Raymond, no, Richard, had lied not only to me, but also to Alice. Or did she know? After his release, he disappeared from law enforcement's radar. Prescott continued. Idaho authorities were looking for him because he had violated the terms of his probation, failing to report to a probation officer, failing to pay restitution to victims. Now we know he moved here, changed his name, and, married your daughter. Did Alice know? Was all I could ask. Prescott shrugged. That we have yet to find out. But this information greatly strengthens our position in court. Your death scam becomes part of a larger pattern of criminal activity. So now he's definitely going to jail? I asked, not knowing whether to be happy or not. Most likely, yes, Prescott nodded. And for a considerable amount of time. It's a repeat offense with aggravating circumstances, plus fugitive from justice, forgery, identity change. I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of the situation. My daughter had married a professional con man who obviously saw her and me as new victims for his machinations. What about Alice? I asked. If she didn't know about Raymond's past, that might mitigate her guilt, but it wouldn't exonerate her, Prescott replied. She still committed the crime of declaring you dead and misappropriating your property. But if she agreed to cooperate with the investigation, to testify against her husband, the court might favor her. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, I wanted justice, wanted Alice to answer for what she'd done. On the other, she was still my daughter, my flesh and blood. The thought of her spending years in prison hurt. What are we going to do next? I asked. Prescott stepped forward. Now that we have this information, I suggest we change our strategy. We will sue not only to restore your identity, but also to prosecute Raymond Langtry, also known as Richard Lester, for a series of financial crimes. As for your daughter, I think we should offer her a plea bargain. What kind of deal? If she agrees to testify against her husband, make full restitution to you, and plead guilty, we can ask the court for a minimal sentence, perhaps probation instead of real time. I thought about it. It sounded reasonable. I didn't want revenge on Alice. I wanted justice and to get back what was rightfully mine. Okay, I finally said. Let's try that approach. Prescott nodded and made a note in his notebook. I'll contact the prosecutor's office and your daughter's attorney. In the meantime, we need to continue the process of restoring your identity. The court has scheduled a hearing for next Thursday. We need to prepare. Walking out of Prescott's office, I felt physically and emotionally drained. So much turmoil in such a short time. My death, my daughter's betrayal, my son-in-law's criminal past. It was like I was caught up in some crazy detective novel. Back in the apartment above the garage, I sat in a chair, placing the photo albums the Fosters had returned beside me. Opening one of them, I saw snapshots of my childhood, a little girl with pigtails next to her parents, school pictures, prom. After flipping a few pages, I reached photos of my youth, marriage, Alice's birth. Here I am holding my newborn daughter in my arms, glowing with happiness. Here's Alice taking her first steps. Here she is walking to school with a huge bouquet. Here she is receiving an award for excelling in math. When did it all go wrong? Where did I go wrong in raising her? Or was it not me, but her father's genes? A selfish, narcissistic man who abandoned his family for a young secretary. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. It was Vivian Summers, an old friend of mine with whom we'd worked together in the school cafeteria years ago. Beatrice, she exclaimed when I answered. I just found out. My God, I thought you were dead. The whole town thought you were dead. Hi, Vivian. I couldn't hold back a smile. Vivian was always emotional and impulsive, the complete opposite of my restraint. As you can see, the rumors of my death were greatly exaggerated. That's what I told Martha. You remember Martha Jenkins? She's in charge of the dining room now. So I told her, Beatrice can't just die like that. She would have warned me. Vivian laughed at her joke, then grew serious. But seriously, what has happened? There are the wildest rumors in town. I briefly told her the story of my resurrection, leaving out the most painful details. Vivian oohed and ahed, expressing outrage at Alice's behavior. I never trusted that girl, she said. I remember her coming to your cafeteria after school, always looking like she was doing you a favor, and that husband of hers. He's slippery. You should move in with me. What? I didn't understand the sudden change of subject. Move in with me, Vivian repeated. I have a huge house, 3 bedrooms, and I'm all alone since Harold went to the grave 5 years ago. There's plenty of room. Why would you be stuck in some rented apartment? Actually, I'm staying with a lawyer, I said, in a very nice apartment above the garage. Over the garage, Vivian snorted. Beatrice Winslow, you deserve better than an apartment over someone else's garage. Move in with me, at least temporarily, until your house is resolved. I've got a lovely guest bedroom overlooking the garden, a private bathroom, and complete discretion. I hesitated. Vivian's offer was tempting. We'd been friends for years, knew each other's habits well, and the thought of not being alone during this difficult period was appealing. Okay, I finally said. Thank you, Vivian. I accept your offer. That's great, she exclaimed. I'll see you tomorrow, and don't you dare bring any food. I've already made a week's menu. You need to fatten up. You must be exhausted from all the upheaval. I smiled, remembering Vivian's culinary talents. Her pies and casseroles were legendary in the school cafeteria. Thank you, Vivian. You're a true friend. The next day, I packed up my few belongings and moved in with Vivian. Her home, a spacious bungalow in a quiet neighborhood in Clarksburg, welcomed me with warmth and comfort. The guest bedroom was just as she'd described, bright, spacious, and overlooking the flowering garden. Make yourself comfortable, Vivian said as she helped me set up my things. Dinner will be ready in an hour. I made your favorite lasagna. Do you remember what my favorite lasagna is? I wondered. It's been so many years. Of course I remember. Vivian snorted. With eggplant and a double helping of mozzarella. You always asked for extra when I made it for the school teachers. I was touched that she remembered such a small thing, whereas my own daughter seemed to have forgotten everything that connected us. 2 days after I moved in, Prescott called with big news. The investigation against Raymond Langtree is heating up, he said. Idaho authorities are seeking his extradition to stand trial for violating his probation. Our DA's office is willing to cooperate, but they want to wrap up a local fraud case first. What about Alice? I asked. Her attorney contacted me. She's willing to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's willing to testify against Raymond and make full restitution. How? I asked. She offers to sell the house they bought on Strawberry Street and give you the money, plus her share of their import business. According to a preliminary estimate, it could be about $350,000. I was amazed at the amount, more than my house on Elm Street and my savings combined. Is their business really that profitable? I asked suspiciously. On paper, yes, Prescott replied. But the prosecutor's office is checking the legality of all their operations. If it turns out that the money was obtained illegally, it could complicate the compensation process. I wondered. Alice's money might allow me to buy my old house back from the Fosters and start a new life. But wasn't that money tainted by crime? What would you advise me? I asked. Legally, it's in your best interest to accept the compensation, replied Prescott. If the business turns out to be illegal, that's Alice and Raymond's problem, not yours. You're a victim entitled to compensation. And morally? I asked quietly. Prescott was silent. That's for you to decide, Beatrice, but the money itself is neutral. What matters is how you use it. After my conversation with Prescott, I sat in Vivian's garden for a long time, thinking, should I accept the money from the daughter who had declared me dead, or should I refuse it on principle? What was more important, justice or moral purity? Vivian found me there and sat down beside me. What are you thinking about? She asked, handing me a cup of tea. I told her about Alice's proposal and my doubts. You know what, Beatrice? Vivian said slowly. Sometimes life is too short for pride. You deserve compensation. You deserve to get your house back, to start a new life. If Alice and her husband made their money through dishonest means, that's their sin, not yours. Take what's owed to you. I nodded. Vivian, as always, went straight to the point. The next day, there was a preliminary meeting with the prosecutor. After reviewing all aspects of the case, he agreed to a deal with Alice, probation in exchange for cooperation and full restitution. Raymond, on the other hand, faced serious jail time for both the fraud in our state and the probation violation in Idaho. We're close to wrapping up, Prescott said as we left the prosecutor's office. Next week would be crucial. I nodded, feeling oddly relieved. After so much turmoil, everything was finally falling into place. My identity would be restored, justice would be served, and I would get a fresh start. You know, Daniel, I said, looking up at the fall sky. 3 months ago, I thought my life was over. My sister was dead. The future looked empty and meaningless. And now I feel like new possibilities are opening up in front of me. Prescott smiled. You are a strong woman, Beatrice. Not everyone could go through such trials and keep their spirits up. I don't know how strong I am. I shook my head. I just didn't have much choice. When life throws you into a corner, there's no choice but to fight. Or give up, he said. A lot of people choose the latter. Not me, I said firmly. Never me. That evening, back at Vivian's house, I felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I looked forward to the future with hope. Yes, my daughter had betrayed me. Yes, my house had been sold. But life went on, and there was still room for new beginnings. To the future, Vivian said, raising her glass of wine at dinner. To your future, Beatrice. To the future, I echoed, clinking glasses with her, and to true friends who stay with you when things fall apart. Vivian smiled, and we continued our dinner, discussing plans for tomorrow and the week ahead. Life went on, no matter what. 6 months later, I stood at the window of my new apartment and looked out at the falling leaves in the park across the street. Autumn in Clarksburg was always beautiful. The golden and scarlet colors, the clear air, the special light that only comes at this time of year. A lot has changed in these 6 months. The court restored my identity, invalidating the death certificate. The bank returned my stolen funds with interest. Alice and Raymond's trial ended in a guilty verdict. I still remember the day the judge announced the verdict. The courtroom was full. The story of the resurrected woman who had been declared dead by her own daughter had captured the attention of all of Clarksburg. I sat in the front row next to Prescott, straight and collected, though everything was trembling inside. Raymond, or Richard, as he was now called in official documents, had gotten 15 years in prison. Fraud, forgery, misappropriation of property, violating the terms of his Idaho probation. The list of his crimes was long. He stood there stony-faced as he listened to the sentence, showing no remorse whatsoever. Alice was luckier. Thanks to a plea bargain and testimony against her husband, she got a suspended sentence of 5 years and mandatory community service. She had to reimburse me for the full value of the stolen property and pay a fine. When the sentence was announced, she turned and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Relief, remorse, disappointment. I didn't go up to her after the trial. I couldn't find the strength. Maybe someday, but not now. The wounds of betrayal were too fresh. The money from the sale of Alice's house and her share of the business came into my account a month after the trial. It was a substantial sum, almost $400,000, more than I'd ever had before. The first thing I did was contact the Fosters about buying back my old house on Elm Street, but it turned out they had already sold it to another family, a young couple with 2 children. There was no getting the house back. I was devastated at first. This house was my anchor, the place where I spent most of my adult life, where I raised Alice, where I survived my husband's passing, where I planned to spend my old age. Sometimes losing the old opens the door to the new, Vivian said when I shared my disappointment with her. As always, she was right. After weeks of searching, I found an apartment in a new development overlooking Clarksburg's Central Park. Spacious, bright, on the 4th floor, with large windows and a balcony. Not at all like my old house, and that was a good thing. No ghosts of the past, no painful memories. I had completely revamped the furnishings. No old furniture, no things that reminded me of my old life. A modern kitchen with a breakfast bar, a comfortable couch in the living room, a large desk by the window. My new workplace. Yes, work. It was another major change in my life. At 67, I decided not to retire, but to start a new career. Not because of the money. The compensation ensured me a comfortable old age, but because of the need to be useful, busy, needed. The idea came unexpectedly during one of my sessions with Dr. Eleanor Moss, whom I did start seeing at Prescott's insistence. What did you like to do when you were young, Beatrice? She asked me. Before I was married, before I worked in the school canteen. What brought you joy? I wondered. Writing. I've always loved to write. In college, I even published short stories in the student magazine. And why did you stop? Life intervened. I shrugged. Marriage, a baby, a job. There was no time for hobbies. And now? Dr. Moss asked gently. Now you have time. And perhaps a story worth telling. And so my new career was born. I began writing a column for the local newspaper, first about everyday life, then about old age, about overcoming hardship, about finding myself after 60. The column suddenly became popular. People wrote me letters, sharing their stories, asking for advice. Then came an offer from a publisher to write a book about my experience of resurrection. I hesitated for a long time. Did I want to bring my personal tragedy to the public? But then I realized that my story could help other people who have experienced betrayal by loved ones, loss of identity, and the need to start from scratch in old age. Now I worked on the book every morning, sitting at my desk by the window overlooking the park. I was in the middle of a manuscript, and the work was going well. Writing proved therapeutic. Each word helped me to make sense of what had happened, accept it, and move on. My thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It was Prescott, informing me that Raymond's appeal had been rejected. His conviction stood. This is the last legal hurdle, Beatrice, he said. The case is now officially closed. You are free to move on without looking back. Thank you for everything, Daniel, I said sincerely. I couldn't have done it without you. You would have, he said confidently. You're stronger than you think, but I'm glad I could help. After the conversation, I turned back to the window, thinking about his words. Free to move on without looking back. It sounded good, but was it possible? Could one truly leave the past behind, especially when it included such a painful betrayal? The doorbell rang. Vivian stood on the doorstep with a large basket full of fruit and homemade baked goods. I thought I'd check on you, she said, coming in and going straight to the kitchen. You must have forgotten to eat again, sitting over your manuscript. I smiled. Vivian knew me all too well. Indeed, when I was immersed in my work, I forgot about everything: food, time, the world around me. How's the book coming along? She asked, arranging the fruit in a vase. Good, I replied. I finished the chapter on the trial today. I have to write about the new life and the conclusion. And what will you say in the conclusion? Vivian turned to me, looking intently into my eyes. I found myself thinking that sometimes loss opens the door to new possibilities, that it's never too late to start over. That betrayal hurts deeply, but not necessarily forever. Vivian nodded. That was a good conclusion. What about Alice? Will you mention her? I sighed. Alice, my daughter, my flesh and blood, the person who betrayed me in the cruelest way. I'll write the truth, I said, about what she did, about how I felt, about my decision not to have a relationship with her. Are you sure? Vivian asked gently. She's your only daughter. I'm sure, I said firmly. I don't hate her, Vivian. Hate takes too much energy, and I don't have much at my age. But I don't forgive. Some things are unforgivable. I just, letting go. Letting her go. Letting go of our connection. Letting go of expectations and hopes. For my own good. Vivian nodded understandingly and didn't pursue the subject further. Instead, she started making tea, telling me the latest news about a neighbor who decided to breed exotic birds, about the new menu at the corner cafe, about the upcoming festival in the city park. After she left, I went back to work, but thoughts of my daughter lingered. Alice called several times after the trial, leaving messages apologizing, asking to meet. I never returned her calls. Once she even came to my apartment, but I didn't answer the door. After a while, the calls stopped. Apparently, she realized that I was not ready to communicate. Sometimes I wondered if I was too cruel. Doesn't everyone deserve a second chance? But then I remembered her cold face when she said, It wasn't personal, Mom. It was just business. And I realized I can't. I don't want to go back to that relationship. Maybe I'm selfish. Maybe a mother should forgive her child, no matter what they've done. But I no longer wanted to live by someone else's rules, to conform to someone else's expectations. At 67, I finally had the freedom to do what I thought was right for me, without looking at public opinion. In the evening, I decided to take a walk in the park. The fall air was cool and fresh, and the leaves rustled under my feet. I loved these evening walks. They helped me to put my thoughts in order, to rest from working on my book. I often met other regulars in the park: an elderly couple walking their terrier, a young mother with twins in a stroller, an artist who was always painting by the pond. We nodded to each other, sometimes exchanging a few words about the weather. Small, insignificant interactions that nevertheless created a sense of community. Today, as I walked past the playground, I saw a woman reading a book on a bench. She looked up, our eyes met, and I recognized Eleanor Moss, my psychologist. Beatrice. She smiled. What a nice meeting. Hello, Dr. Moss. I came closer. I didn't know you lived in this neighborhood. I just moved here, she said. An apartment overlooking the park is the dream of many in this city. Would you like to sit down? I sank down on the bench next to her. It was strange to see my psychologist outside the office, in an informal atmosphere, but somehow it didn't make me uncomfortable. How is your book coming along? She asked. Good, I replied. I'm getting close to the finale. The hardest part is the conclusion. Why difficult? She was interested. Because you need to summarize, to draw some kind of conclusion from the whole story. And I'm not sure I've come to a final understanding. Dr. Moss looked thoughtfully at the children playing in the playground. You know, Beatrice, not all stories have clear conclusions and morals. Sometimes life is just a sequence of events that we try to make sense of in hindsight. Maybe your conclusion shouldn't be definitive. Maybe it should reflect where you are now, in the healing process, in finding new paths. I nodded, mulling over her words. Perhaps you're right. I've always strived for certainty, for clear answers, but in this case, uncertainty is part of the process. She finished for me. Accepting it is also a form of wisdom. We sat for a while longer, talking about books, about the park, about the weather as casual acquaintances, not as doctor and patient. There was something liberating about it. Back home, I sat down at my computer with a new understanding of what the conclusion of my book should look like. Not a final conclusion, not a universal truth, but an honest account of where I am now, my healing journey, and the new possibilities that have opened up before me. The next few weeks passed in intense work. I was finishing the book, meeting with my editor, discussing the details of publication. Life was filled with new meaning, new goals. One October day, as I was working on the final edits, the phone rang. It was Prescott. Beatrice, his voice sounded excited. I have news about your daughter. My heart sank. What's wrong? She's moving. To Seattle. She's accepted a job offer with some charity organization. I paused, digesting the information. Alice is leaving Clarksburg, putting an end to our history. She wanted me to tell you that she respects your decision not to communicate, Prescott continued. But she wanted you to know that she regrets what she did. She always will. Thank you for letting me know, I said. After the conversation, I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the park, at the people going about their business, at the falling leaves. Alice is leaving, starting a new life, just like me. Maybe it's for the best. Maybe we both need this distance, this new beginning. I didn't feel joy at her departure, but I didn't feel grief either. More like a quiet acceptance of the inevitable. Our paths parted, perhaps forever, and that was something I had to learn to live with. That evening, I finished the last chapter of the book. I reread it, made a few edits, and sent it to my editor. That was it. The work was done. The story was told. The next day, I woke up with a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if finishing the book symbolized the end of a certain phase of my life. I was ready to move on. After breakfast, I went to meet with a group of seniors I had met through Vivian. We met once a week at the local community center, discussing books, sharing news, sometimes arranging tours or visits to exhibitions. It was another nice addition to my new life, socializing with people my age, with similar life experiences. Today, we plan to discuss the possibility of creating a hobby club for the elderly, a place where they could teach each other skills, share experiences, find new hobbies. The idea came to me after talking to Prescott about my writing experience. Each of us is good at something, I explained to the group. Some of us bake great pies. Some of us know how to garden. Some of us know all about classic literature. Why not create a platform where we could share this knowledge? The idea was met with enthusiasm. By the end of the meeting, we had a rough plan of action, a list of potential teachers and topics, even a name, Silver Age Academy. Returning home, I felt a surge of energy and inspiration. Perhaps this will be my next project after the book. Perhaps this is where I will find a new vocation. Waiting for me at home was a letter from the publisher offering me public speaking engagements after the book came out. They wanted me to give a series of lectures on coping in old age, finding new purpose, and recovering from betrayal, a topic they felt would be of interest to many. I put the letter aside, deciding to think about it tomorrow. Today, I just wanted to savor the feeling of completion, of peace. I brewed some tea, picked up a book, and settled down in a chair by the window. It was slowly getting dark outside the window. The lanterns in the park lit up one by one, creating a cozy glow in the twilight. A few late visitors were still strolling along the paths. A typical evening in Clarksburg. I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely peaceful. Life went on, no matter what. My life. The new life I was building day by day, brick by brick. Did I feel sorry for the past? Sometimes. Were there moments when I longed for the old house, the relationship with my daughter, the familiar routine? Of course, but I've learned not to let those feelings define my present. Alice's betrayal left a deep scar on my heart, a scar that may never fully heal, but I've learned to live with it, learned not to let it define my life. At 67, I started over. New house, new job, new friends, new goals. Not a perfect life, but my own. A life I chose for myself, not one that was forced upon me by circumstances or the expectations of others. And therein, perhaps, lay the main lesson of my story. It's never too late to start over. It is never too late to find new meaning, new purpose, even after the deepest betrayal, the heaviest loss. The future was uncertain, as it had always been, but for the first time in a long time, I looked at that uncertainty not with fear, but with curiosity. What else would I learn? Who else would I meet? What other opportunities would open up before me? I didn't know the answers to these questions, and that was fine. Life went on, full of surprises and new beginnings, and I was ready to accept whatever it had in store for me.